Welcome to another secret loot location guide. I'm going to be looking at items that are appearing in places that haven't previously appeared since 0.51 and 0.52, as well as the frequency at which certain items are appearing. And I'm talking about items that are, in a sense, precious or rare. And the first item I'm going to be looking at is the Firefighter's Axe, because it is now appearing in more locations than it has previously, whereas you would often largely find it at fire stations, which is logical. You can now find it in other locations such as this barn here. You can see it here, and inside we have the aforementioned Firefighter's Axe, as well as some residential locations. You can also find the Firefighter's Axe on the front of military vehicles, as seen here, which I'd never seen before, and I do believe this is a relatively new phenomenon. Arguably the biggest change to loot spawning with the most recent updates is what's going on in this little house. I call it the granny house, and you can see it's log down one side, and then it has this yellow exterior on the other side, around from the door, with these blue ornate shutters. And a lot of people are caught on, but it's definitely worth putting in here. This now is probably the best location to get a gun. It's because people aren't always aware of it, and because there's a lot of these on the map. Okay, so in here you will often find an item of clothing and a gun in this corner. In fact, it's pretty much guaranteed if it hasn't been looted. You can see here it's an SKS. Now, the weapons you find here can vary from pistols to rifles to shotguns, except for AKs and the real hardcore military stuff. You don't get that sort of thing spawning here, but you will get Mosins spawning here. As you can see, SKSs, a whole range of pistols, handguns, and if you're lucky, you can also get ammo. And you can see down here under the table, there's some shotgun shells there. So this is an area that has been unlooted, and it's probably your best bet for getting your hands on a gun in a very busy server. Another great location to come in the new update is the Lighthouse between Cherno and Electro. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. This car seems to have a very high spawn rate for valuable items. Now, generally, this car does spawn well, but here it seems to be even more efficient in its rate of spawn. You can see here we've got a repeater and a carbine in the car, which is pretty impressive. You don't see two guns in a car very often. We also have drink on the bonnet there, and spray paint and walkie-talkie in the boot, so that's excellent. You've also got boats down here. Now, with the recent update, we all know netting spawns at boats. That's fine, and you can pick up a map online. They've also upped the amount of other loot that's around boats. So, for example, you've got wellies, you've got boonie hats, and you've got raincoats. And the thing about raincoats is that they are perhaps one of the most useful items with the changes to the heat, the hot and cold system in game. So you can get hypothermia, hypothermic if you're cold, and wet. And wet is the key. If you're wet, you get very cold very quickly. So having a raincoat is a great idea. Whereas these silos, factory districts, and these gangways, these metal walkways, were recently updated and filled out with loot, which I covered in the last episode of the secret loot location guides. Now, one of the great locations to go to is a location where there are lots of vehicles. It seems in the new updates, a focus has been left on making sure plenty of loot exists around vehicles. You'll often get a mix of different type of vehicles, like military and civilian, in one location, such as this, and we're in one of the apartment blocks above Cherno. You can see here there's a car park with a military vehicle and a coach. Now the coaches have also been updated. You can now find items underneath coaches, which is a fairly recent addition. So if we have a look here, you can see underneath here we have 2 items of clothing, a hoodie, I think a tracksuit top there. You can also find things like screwdrivers and different things like that underneath these. And then we have the vehicles over here. A vest by this military vehicle. Now these will spawn one fairly decent piece of military loot. And then these military jeeps will often have many items in, including clothing, maybe ammo, that type of thing. And then over here we have these little vans and people carriers, and they will often have food on the bonnet, as you can see here. And then we go on to these other vehicles, as we saw previously. These ones quite often have guns in. You get loads of items of clothing and food, even medical supplies. You can see in there there's an EpiPen inside here. So if you do see a location with a whole bunch of cars, it's definitely worth checking it out. Okay, so staying on the theme of cars, because there's so much loot around them now, it's worth finding out where the best car parks are. One of those is Dubkey. There are 2 supermarkets on the western side of Dubkey. Dubkey is the most easterly apartment block above Cherno. And you can see here we have, in this particular corner, we have a range of cars, including this one that spawns weapons, as we've previously seen. Food, other types of gear and kit going on here. You can see medical supplies as well. This one here is excellent for backpacks. Usually you can find a backpack around this one. And then down beyond the supermarket, which is good to loot itself, although not as good as it used to be, we have another car park, a bus station, where we have military vehicles, loads of other cars, and there's a really good chance of finding ammo, a weapon, a rifle of some form or shape. You can find stuff underneath these, as we've discussed. There's also the blue car again over here, and 2 more military vehicles in this location. Probably the most loaded car now in game, other than the blue car for its spawning of weapons, is this red car that is raised on bricks. You can see here there are bricks underneath it, just there. Now you can find a whole bunch of stuff on here, including ammo, such as this one here, clothing, other headwear, all sorts of things you can find there. But there's a really sneaky thing here. Okay, with this particular car, you can now find stuff underneath the car. Alright, and this is pretty new. So if you lay down and look underneath, you'll see there are 2 cans of spray paint underneath the front of this car. Now you can find other stuff, clothing, ammo, food, all underneath here. And you won't see them necessarily, and people don't actually check it very often. So you may find, when you see this car, that you find something very useful underneath the front of it. Within game you can find these factory buildings. There's a few littered around. They have the scaffolding up one side, but they do have these out areas, these kind of raised platforms. On these you can find melee weapons, headwear, more melee weapons, and you follow around the side. These are areas that people tend to just run by, but if you need a weapon to take on that zombie horde, you can see here There's an axe. So these are kind of like these concrete areas. Also, something that surprised me is that you can actually find some military loot in some of these warehouses. I'm in Cherno, on the outskirts in the industrial estate, and here inside I found these Gorka pants, but I also found some SKS ammo, which is very rare currently in 0.50. So that's a great find, and it's worth checking these locations out just in case there's some of that ammo around. Also recently, pistols have been spawning on top of the industrial building. You can see this one's on the outskirts of Cherno, and here, tucked away, is a Derringer just here. Guys, I hope you found it useful. If you did, click the thumbs up. And if you've got any advice or any tips about looting locations yourself, please add them in the comments section down below, and I might well add them to the next video. So thanks again, and I will see you soon.